Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. It is so good to be back here in Evansville. Sorry to disappoint you. I do not have an English accent yet. I don't sound sophisticated and cool. But Mandy and I, we moved here. This was back in 2004. And it was to join Campus Outreach to help kind of relaunch a ministry at USI. And we were here for 6 years in this congregation. And it quickly became home. Just the people here, extended their arms, welcomed us in, provided a place of spiritual nourishment as we were still young in our faith. We were growing and sitting under the teaching and the Sunday schools and all the things that you guys get to participate in today. We're so thankful for that. And then the continued partnership to this day. And so it's a sweet thing to be back. We're so thankful to be here. We're so thankful for the support that the church extends our way, that many individuals extend our way, the prayers. As we were singing those worship songs, I was getting a little overwhelmed just with gratitude and the work that the Lord is doing here in Evansville. So it is good to be back and thankful to be with you guys. Today, we are going to be looking at a passage from the book of Isaiah, or as they would say in England, Isaiah. But we're going to be in chapter 6, and this will probably be a familiar text. We're going to be looking at chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. If you're in the Bibles in front of you, it's on page 330. So let me read that, and then we'll take a look together. Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called. And the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. So today, what I'd like to look at as we maybe unpack this passage a little bit, there's a lot that could be said here, and we're not going to say it all. But I want to look at what is the motivation, what could be our motivation for missions. The Bible is clear that the followers of Christ are called to go, to share the good news, the hope of Christ with the world. I don't know, how does that make you feel when you hear that? Does that feel frightening? Maybe a bit intimidating? Where do I even start with that type of call or command to go? Or perhaps we just get busy in our day-to-day routines and it maybe gets, I've heard that it gets pushed to the back burners and life's busy. Yeah, how do you think about that call to go? If you're here this morning, maybe you're just looking into Christianity. Maybe you're new to Christian things. Come with us as we explore what is it that God calls his followers into, this vision, this big mission that he wants us to be a part of. It's a unique privilege to join the work God is doing around the world as he continues to draw people to himself. Well, today we're going to look at Isaiah's vision of God. A very powerful passage. He sees the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, Yahweh. This is the moment when God calls him to be his prophet. He is to be God's mouthpiece to the people. So what we're going to look at today is really three things from this passage. First, we're going to see that Isaiah is motivated by God's holiness. Secondly, we're going to see that he is motivated by God's grace. And then thirdly, we're going to see how he responds. What is the response to God's holiness and grace? So let's begin. Point number one, motivated by God's holiness. We see this in verses 1 through 4. As we look at these 4 verses, we see the overwhelming holiness of God on display. Verse 1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Verse 1 brings us into what is happening at this point in history. King Uzziah has died. He's dead. And when a king dies, there's much political uncertainty. What's next? Who's the next ruler? What's it going to be like? Under King Uzziah's reign, God had brought prosperity, but now he's gone. What's going to happen next? Well, we're going to look at 3 different aspects of his holiness. We're going to see his holy control, his holy majesty, and his holy worthiness. First, we see God's holy control. We see that the Lord here, unlike King Uzziah, the Lord is alive. And what is his posture? It says that the Lord, the King Supreme, is seated on a throne. He's not pacing and worrying about what's next. He's not wondering what the next king will be like, the political uncertainty of the day. He is in absolute control. And we can take great comfort in this, knowing that our God, the same God, is seated on the throne today. No matter the instability of the world around us, the craziness that we might feel as we read headlines, as we watch the news, God is in control. We see his holy control. Next, we see his holy majesty here. It says, and the train of his robe filled the temple. The status of the monarch would be communicated by the size of his train, the train of his robe. And the length of his robe signified the king's majesty. This was in the heavenly temple that Isaiah is seeing God seated on here. It's filled, it's overflowing. No royalty, no matter how great, can compare to the majesty of the Lord. And then next we see his holy worthiness. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. This is a powerful image, these heavenly created beings that were designed to worship the Lord. They're perfectly designed for their environment, the presence of God. It's almost as if they can't even look upon his holiness. It's almost as if they can't stand on the holy ground that he is upon, and they are flying in his presence. We see his worthiness. And what are they doing? They're calling to one another. They have a message. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. More impressive than the thing how they appear is the message that they're communicating. Back and forth, they're calling this to one another. And we know they're not these small little creatures because the very ground that Isaiah is standing on is shaking. The very thing that's supposed to be stable and give him comfort, it's undone. It's shaking, and the smoke is filling the temple. It's an all-out attack on his senses. What he's seeing, what he's hearing, what he's feeling, perhaps what he's smelling with the smoke. He's in the presence of a holy God. And they're calling back and forth to one another this message. And we see this threefold repetition, holy, holy, holy. You know, in the English language, we have our ways of different literary techniques that we want to, when we want to emphasize something. You know, we use exclamation points. We underline, we bold, we italicize. Well, the Jews had their literary device, and it was the use of repetition. If something was repeated twice, said twice in a row, it means this is really important. Listen up. And here we see this threefold repetition, which we don't see anywhere else in the Bible. Actually, we don't see God's other attributes talked of this way. We don't see the Bible saying that God is love, 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 although he is perfectly loving. And we don't see that he is just, 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 although he is perfectly just. This threefold repetition is meant to jump off the page, to grab our attention, to tell us something about who God is, that he is holy. Well, what is holiness? We say that a lot, but what is holiness? The holiness of God does include his absolute moral purity, but it is more. Holy, holy, holy emphasizes God's absolute uniqueness, that he is set apart from his creation. We cannot think of God in hierarchical terms, that God is simply at the top of his creation, and at the bottom is the cell, something not really simple but more simple, and then the fish, and then maybe humanity, and then these created angels, these beings, and then God's at the top. No, that would be to miss it altogether, that God is actually categorically different than all of his creation. That he is infinitely greater than the cell, in the same way that he is infinitely greater than the most amazingly created angelic being. That he is categorically different, that he is holy, he is set apart. He is not part of his creation. He exists outside of his creation. And he is holy, holy, holy. The whole earth is full of his glory. If God is truly holy, if he is worthy above all things, then the whole earth should know of his glory and worship him. John Piper, pastor and theologian, says that missions exists because worship doesn't. Missions exists because worship doesn't. God deserves global worship. To worship anything other than this holy God is to worship something less than, something created. All that is created is less than the Creator. This is our motivation for missions, that God is worthy of all praise, of all glory, and of all honor. Not too long ago at our church in London, we had a missions Sunday. We had flags kind of strung across the sanctuary and all the different countries represented. It was a really cool sight to see. But as I was thinking about it, it really struck me that each of these flags, the hundreds of different countries that are represented, they represent people. They represent people groups and souls that are spread across the globe that need to know the worthiness of God. They need to worship him. They are created to worship him. London's an interesting place because of its diversity, that many of those nations, those different flags are represented within our own city. It's interesting that even on the government website, if you get on there and look up some of the statistics about the city of London, you'll find that over 300 languages, different languages, are spoken daily as you walk about the city. One time when we were walking back from a trip, we had gotten off the plane, gotten on the train to get to the middle of the city, and walked to our home, and all the while we're passing people, and I remember one of our kids said, "I haven't heard English yet." And that's just the reality of a global city like London, where the nations are represented. We're 4 out of 10 people, so if you meet 10 people on the street, 4 of those people are born somewhere outside of the UK. Somewhere else in the world is where they're from. And that's why, Faith Bible Church has missions partners located around the world because of the holiness of God. That is our motivation, that God is worthy, that there is a need out there. Just like there's a need here, but there's a need out there because there is none like him. When was the last time that you fixed your eyes on the holiness of God? Maybe in the silence of your own home, before a busy day, just to sit before him and to dwell on his holiness. Let that motivate us towards mission. As we reflect on his holiness, we see his infinite worthiness. He is worthy of our lives. Let us step out in mission because he is worthy. So when we're afraid of what others might think, or we ask ourselves, is it really worth the discomfort that I'll feel if I speak up? Remember the holiness of God. That's point one. Isaiah was motivated by God's holiness. Point two, he was motivated by God's grace. And this is in verses 5 through 7. This is Isaiah's response to what he's seeing. Verse 5, "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." He's afraid. He says, "Woe, cursed is me." Another translation says, "I am undone. I'm unraveled before the holiness of God." He is convicted of his own sinfulness. It isn't that Isaiah is just an outwardly, bad person. I'm sure amongst his peers, he was a good guy. But in the presence of an eternal, infinite, holy God, he is devastated. He is confronted with his own finality. He is confronted with his own uncleanness. God's holiness exposes human sin, and it cannot be handled casually. Sin separates us from God. The unholy cannot be in the presence of the Holy One. Missions is needed because people need forgiveness for their sins so that they can be brought back to God and enjoy a relationship with Him eternally. It's interesting, he's talking about lips here, people of unclean lips. Maybe that sounds a little strange, like they're just dirty lips. Like, what's going on here? Well, Isaiah was to be God's spokesman, his prophet. He was to declare to him, to the people, who God is. And he says, the very thing that I'm supposed to be glorifying God with, it's unclean. It's not even worthy to declare who he is. The thing that he should be proud of, his ability to speak, is unclean. At this moment, God could have cast Isaiah out of his presence because of his uncleanness. But God doesn't leave him in his sin. He shows him grace. God moves toward him for restoration. He doesn't move away from him to isolate himself. God has every right to move away, but instead he moves towards. Look at verses 6 and 7. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." It was necessary for Isaiah to be purified. Purification is necessary to be in the presence of God. The coal from the altar is taken and pressed to Isaiah's lips. God atones for, he covers his sin. Now he can be God's prophet to the people. This is the grace of God, that God moves towards Isaiah in spite of his sinfulness. We see that salvation in this text, we see that salvation cannot be earned. It can only be received. In our hearts, we think that we can be good enough at times for God. That is the deceit of the human heart, that if I try harder, I can attain God's favor. This is the message of every other religion in the world. If I do the right things, I can earn God's favor. And we see here, as what is required for Isaiah is God to move towards him in grace. In verses 6 and 7, we see the message of salvation. And it must be proclaimed. This message must be proclaimed. We need God's grace in order to be saved from our sin. Well, where will this grace come from for us? How will we be purified? How will our sins be atoned for? Well, as we look forward, as we look through the greater narrative of the Bible, as we look forward to Jesus, we see that God's grace comes to us through his only Son. God, the Holy One, the Creator, enters into his creation. God becomes flesh, born of a woman, Jesus. Let's not get this wrong. He didn't come because he had to, but he came because he wanted to, because he loved us. It's not because we were deserving. He wasn't obligated because of how good we were. Just as he didn't move towards Isaiah because he was obligated to. No, he came because he chose to love us in spite of our sin. Jesus makes a way for forgiveness by dying on the cross in our place. Through his death, he makes atonement for our sin. This is the good news, and it must be proclaimed. This is the message of our mission. And I mentioned this earlier, this is what makes Christianity different from anything out there. That God's holiness doesn't drive him away from us. We don't live in fear. But because of his grace, we live with joy and confidence. It's not by my works. It's by grace alone, through faith. You know, an example of this as I was thinking through the power of grace and the power of grace motivating us in our lives, I was thinking of my father's story, my dad's story. And when I thought about my dad's story and how he became a Christian, there was a powerful moment, there was a crucial moment, and it came when his father entered into his life and moved towards him when he could have moved away. My dad got into some trouble growing up, especially in his high school years, to the point where he had to go before a judge. And it was when he was set to go before the judge. You know, you get your phone call, and he's like, I can't call anyone. I can't even call my own dad. I've gone too far this time. But the bailiff knew my dad's father, and he called him and said, hey, this is what's happening. And so he goes before the judge that morning, and he sees his dad in the courtroom. And it's a lot of dads and fathers here. My dad's father comes in and leans over the railing and says, son, he looks him in the eyes and says, son, I love you. Come home. And that's where it clicked for my dad. He saw the grace of God and what he has done through his son Jesus by moving towards him when he could have moved away from him. And it forever changed him. And it was from that point forward that he wanted to use his life to declare that message to others. This is the result of the grace of God in our lives. And this is the motivation of Isaiah, that Isaiah is being motivated by grace. Let us also move towards others with this amazing message of grace. Thirdly, so we see that he's motivated by God's holiness. We see that he's motivated by God's grace. And finally, what is Isaiah's response? Point 3, responding to God's holiness and grace. Look at verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. Here the Lord asks a question, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? He isn't asking because he's in need. He's not asking because he's anxious and doesn't have a solution. But what he's doing here is he's inviting Isaiah to be his prophet, to bring his word to the people. It is amazing that God advances his mission through ordinary people. That's how the mission advances. It's through ordinary people that he calls to himself. His method to reach the world is a willing man or a willing woman. Isaiah responds, here I am, send me. This isn't, out of obligation. He's very willing. What motivated Isaiah to move out on mission to those around him was the holiness of God and the grace of God, because grace is a powerful motivator. I was thinking of another example of how we respond to grace in our lives, and how when someone shows us grace, we don't respond necessarily because we're obligated to, but because we want to. And that's what we see here with Isaiah. He's not saying, here am I, send me. Okay, here am I, send me. Yeah, thank you for what I guess I have to. But it's this willingness, it's this joy, it's this overflowing. Here am I, send me. Where does that motivation come from? Imagine if you were, in your home, it catches on fire, tragedy strikes, you're trapped. A stranger walking by, maybe someone you don't even know, doesn't owe you anything, comes into the home and drags you out, rescues you from the burning flames. Now, if that same person the next week said, hey, I need a little help around the house, need to mow my grass, and I need some help, washing my car, what would your response be? I guess I have to. You saved my life. No, it'd be like, gladly, I'll be there if I can help you, if I can lend a hand. That his motivation was not out of obligation, but out of joy to serve him. Because I have grace from God, I want to tell others. What better news could someone hear? They too can find the hope of eternal life, and it's free. It's grace. Let's join Isaiah and respond. Here am I, send me. Send me to my friends, send me to my family, my coworkers, my neighbors who don't know Jesus. It's interesting, Isaiah was sent to his own people too. He wasn't sent across oceans or borders necessarily. He was sent to his people. And that's true for most of us here today. That perhaps God is just calling you across the street, to the person who works in the office next to you, the person that you sit next to in class. Who are the people in your life that you could begin praying for opportunities to share this message with? Who are 2 to 3 people that come to mind? Could be a good friend, could be a family member, could be a coworker. Maybe jot them down and just begin praying, God, would you give me an opportunity to share the holiness and grace of God with them? You'll be surprised what happens. Well, let's take a minute here. I would like to think just a little bit about how that could play out. How could we begin to live those things out? How could we be involved in God's mission, even this week? One of the things that we talk about at Campus Outreach, just one of the sayings that we'll say often is, I don't even know where it came from, but dream big, start small. So dream big, but start small. What do I mean by that? Well, what is it that you want to see God do through your friend? One of those names that came to your mind. We want to dream big. You might say something like, I want them to come to know Jesus, that they would have eternal life with God. That's a big dream. But what if it didn't even stop there? What if not only did they come to Christ, but they were hungry to be discipled, and they wanted to grow, and then they started sharing that message with their family, and all of a sudden generations begin to be changed through this person who trusts in Jesus? What if there's a sense of revival on their street that breaks out, and people come to know Jesus? There's spiritual renewal in their community. Can you see the world through those people that you're praying for, through an individual? Can you see the world through your friend? Dream big. Dream big. Ask God. God's mission is moved forward through ordinary individuals. But where do you begin? That's a big thing. Those are big dreams. We're asking God to do those things. We're asking God to do those things in London. But where do you begin? Well, you start small. It starts with a text. It starts with a conversation. It starts with a phone call. And not necessarily even about Jesus. It begins with reaching out and just being a loving friend. It begins with inviting them to a cup of coffee